And finally, we'll wrap up today with a real world example. I was representing the seller of an apartment building recently, and we received an offer. The purchase price was fantastic. The overall terms were very good. Everything looked great. I get down to section 24 of the contract, which is the other terms, which basically is when you are purchasing an apartment building, you're requesting certain information that you want to be knowledgeable about when the transaction closes. That way there's a seamless transition. You can hit the ground running, you have everything you need. I get down to section 24 and the folks are requesting nothing. It was blank. So I thought it might be helpful if we were to run through, when I'm representing the buyer of a transaction, what information we'd be looking for from the previous seller as part of our due diligence period. And the due diligence period is going to be anytime after the contract has been executed, so both parties agree on the initial terms. And then you're typically going to have something like 14 days to do your inspections and things like that. Unless you're buying large buildings, then you're going to have multiple weeks to be doing all your due diligence. But for purposes of today, this is going to be, we're looking at smaller stuff. What items should I be requesting? Okay. First item we're looking for is your rent roll. This is bare bones. This is going to be, I need to know who lives in the building, what units they reside in. And we have an example here we'll take a look at. I want to know how much they're paying, the last payment date. This is going to be, when's the last time I received a check from tenant Joe, which is different than next due for. Okay. I could have received a check yesterday from Joe. So that would be yesterday's date, but he might be due for 3 months ago. He could be very delinquent. So those two dates are not the same thing. So last payment date, when's the last time Joe paid me? Next due for, how current is he on the rent? When did his lease start? And when's his lease scheduled to end? And this is helpful because we want to know if we're planning for rent increases or if we're planning on doing renovations to the property. Maybe Joe no longer can be a tenant if we're doing major renovations. So we want to plan out, when our contractor is going to be doing work. And then we also need to know the security deposit, because if Joe does not have a security deposit, I need the owner to tell me that, because when Joe moves out and says, hey, where's my $1,000 security deposit? I can say, nope, your seller, the previous landlord told me there's no security deposit. Here's the written proof. If you want to take it up with that person, go at it, but I don't have your $1,000. So I need to have a rent roll for everybody in the building. This is the information I'm looking for. And then basic contact information too. So it's a phone number and an email address. Okay. I've heard of some people asking for social security numbers. I think that's too much. Especially at this point in the game. I think if we're towards the end, you can write into the language of the contract, hey, 10 days before closing, I need all of the due diligence that you did on this particular tenant when you placed them. So background checks, if you did criminal, eviction history, things like that. I want all of that at that point. Probably a little bit too intrusive on the front end, but that is helpful information to have as well. Next item I'm looking for is lease agreements. Very important, especially depending on what state you live in, because if you have a naughty tenant and you don't have a lease agreement, well, good luck getting them out, because they could very well say, hey, I signed a 5-year lease agreement. Here's a copy of it. And you don't know if the previous owner signed this or not. It could be completely made up. So I need signed lease agreements by the current owner and by the tenant that reflects rent amount, move in, move out date. Basically, we're looking to confirm that it aligns with the rent roll. The rent roll and the lease agreements, the terms in those two should be identical, no changes. And again, this needs to be signed by the tenant. What you'll run into, especially if you're purchasing from kind of your mom and pop operators, there might not be lease agreements in place. It could very well be a handshake agreement, or there was a lease agreement a number of years ago, it's lapsed, whatever it might be. What we're looking for at that point is going to be what's known as a tenant estoppel. Basically, what I would say is your attorney wants to prepare this, and it's going to be stating the facts. This is the person's name. This is where they reside. This is the rent amount that they're paying. They are scheduled to move out on this date. We are then sending that to the owner and saying, in lieu of a lease agreement, you don't have a lease agreement, I need the tenant to sign this, because if something goes wrong and I need to evict this tenant, I need something to be able to bring to the court. And this is going to be a tenant estoppel. It's basically the tenant acknowledging, I live in this building, this is the amount that I pay, and this is when I'm scheduled to move out. Okay, it's bare bones. It's a framework of who's living in the building. It's very difficult to purchase property without lease agreements in place, because you're really setting yourself up for a huge a huge mess if things go poorly. Next one I'm looking for is proof of payment. This is going to be the last payment that was made for each individual apartment. So if tenant Joe from our early example likes to pay via Cash App, whatever it might be, I need a copy of that. I need to see some kind of a screenshot, or if he's making, he's mailing you a check, whatever that might be. I need to see that. I need to see that it coincides with the dollar amount that his lease agreement, that the dollar amount on the rent roll, the date on the check coincides with the last payment made date. We're looking for different information to verify each other, okay? And proof of payment is proof that it's not just then the owner saying, this is the last time this person paid. This is the actual proof, okay? I ask for the last payment made. You could ask for 3 months, whatever you want to do. But as long as everything lines up, that's going to be the most important thing. Trailing 3 months of owner paid utilities. Why do we need this? Well, we know what from an ownership perspective, we know what our property taxes are going to be. That's public. What's not public is, does this person pay, let's take their water bill, for example. That's not public knowledge. I would need to request that from the seller. So I need to know your water bill. Does the owner pay any electric? So is there like a house meter for the entryway when you walk in that's billed to the owner? I need to have all these things because I don't want anything to go past due. I want to make sure everything's getting paid. But for the water, for example, if you have a massive leak somewhere and it's just pumping water, that's going to be reflected in the last water bill. So we want to be able to get ahead of that. We want to be able to make sure that we're not then the owners and we're getting hit with this massive bill that we weren't expecting. So if there's any owner paid electric, water bill is typically going to be billed to the owner. These are things we want to be requesting. A, because we want to plan when we're projecting out our numbers, we want to make sure our projections are as accurate as possible. But B, and most importantly, if there are any disasters, we want to know that ahead of time. Occupancy permits, depending on where you're building, where you're buying, occupancy permits for your apartment may or may not be a thing. So if we're buying in the city of Albany, they're known as ROPs, the residential occupancy permits. Those are issued every 2 years by the city. The city comes through and does inspections. If we know we're purchasing in a property, we know we're purchasing in an area that has occupancy permits, we need copies of those showing that the apartments have been recently inspected and they're current on their occupancy permits. We get very nervous when an owner hasn't kept up with their inspections and obtaining occupancy. So we want to make sure if we are purchasing an area that has these, we want to get them ahead of time. Because what you don't want is to close on a building. You go, oh, it's no big deal. I'll get the permits after I close. You buy them, you go do your inspections, and the city says, this is not a legal apartment. You need to fix X, Y, and Z. And that's going to be, $30,000. If it's hey, this needs to have an emergency exit out the back, something like that, that's going to be not a very fun environment for you. So we want to make sure we get these up front. And if there are issues, that way it's on the seller to address them and not you after you own the building and you can't go back. T12. So now we're looking at, this is going to be, as we get into larger apartment buildings, you're going to see T12s. And this is just your yearly breakdown in terms of what's been coming in and what's been going out. So for going back to our example of kind of your mom and pop operators, they're likely not going to have a T12. It's more your professional operators that are going to have something like this, but it's tracking how much we're taking or how much we lost in terms of vacancy, what we've paid for taxes. It's all your expenses. It's all of your fees. It's everything associated with the building broken out on a month by month basis, which is helpful because that way you can kind of plan for, okay, if I know that this bill is due on this particular month, I can make sure I have enough cash on hand to be able to hold that. So T12 is just your trailing 12 month of expenses and income for the building. Next is vendor contracts. And this is going to be, again, for your larger properties. But if you have, or if the previous owner had contracts in place for, let's say, snow removal, or they came to spray for bugs, or anything to maintain the property that you would hire an outside vendor to do, likely you're going to be signing a contract to do so. This isn't going to be like a one-off, come help my building. So if the previous owner has signed a 3-year agreement, you want a copy of that agreement because you don't want people to showing up at your house to do work. And you're thinking like, boy, who are these people? I've already hired, a different company to do the same work. So we need all of our vendor contracts as part of our due diligence period. We want to know who's going to be at our property. We want to make sure these people are insured God forbid they were to get hurt. And we also need to know how much we're going to be paying them. And also, we also want to know, are these contracts voidable upon sale of property? So maybe you're not going to be held to this. So these are all the documents that are going to be incredibly important to you when you're purchasing multifamily properties. You really can't get away with not having this information. So when you're looking at properties, when you're putting together offers, make sure you're requesting all this information, because what you want to avoid with all of these is you close on the property, you are now the owner, and you're scrambling to come up with this information, because it's difficult enough to operate multifamily as it is when you have all the information. But if you have a whole bunch of mysteries and you're going to the tenants trying to have them help you, sort everything out, that's going to be a very negative environment for you. So request all your information up front. This is a helpful list in terms of documents that I'm looking for when I'm purchasing multifamily, and documents I'm requesting when I'm representing buyers on deals that we want to review. Again, before the deal becomes concrete, we want to be reviewing all this information. So I hope that helps.